Archer Hayes pulled his 1968 Ford F-100 pickup to the curb in front of Von Meridian Exotics, and for a moment he simply sat there with the engine idling, listening to the low, familiar rumble that had been there for him through every hard year he could remember. The showroom stretched wide and gleaming before him, floor-to-ceiling glass panels, polished black stone running from threshold to threshold, and behind the glass, arranged like jewels in a museum vitrine, the most expensive production automobiles on the planet. A Bugatti Chiron in deep blue black sat nearest the entrance, its curves so extreme they looked sculpted by forces of physics rather than human hands. Beside it, a Ferrari SF90 Stradale in competition red caught every beam of track lighting and threw it back doubled. A Lamborghini Revuelto in solar gold occupied the center of the floor like a proclamation. An Aston Martin DB12 in brushed silver rested near the far partition with a quieter kind of authority. And at the rear of the room, a Rolls-Royce Spectre in pearl white sat apart from the others the way old money has always preferred to stand. Von Meridian Exotics was not simply a car dealership. It was a curated destination in the coastal stretch of Southern California where collectors, hedge fund partners, and tech sector principals came to spend seven figures without blinking. Today the floor was being prepared for a private viewing event, and the staff moved through pre-opening rituals, buffing the already spotless stone, adjusting display cards by fractions of an inch, checking that champagne was properly chilled. Archer stepped out of the pickup wearing a denim jacket that had seen better decades, work boots with road dust on the toe caps, and a plain dark shirt. He carried no briefcase, wore no statement watch, and the keys in his hand were for a truck that had been manufactured when his father was a teenager. A security attendant near the entrance hesitated, just briefly, but then cleared him through, because somewhere in the system there was a private buyer appointment logged under a name the front desk staff had not yet fully cross-referenced. Claire Vaughn, the CEO of Von Meridian, stood near the interior sales lounge watching him through the glass partition. She was 42, impeccably assembled in a charcoal blazer and narrow trousers, a woman who had built the showroom's reputation over a decade of curating exactly the right clientele. She had a sharp eye for the room, and what she saw now, a man in worn denim moving toward a $2.5 million Bugatti, did not compute. Beside her, Tyler Knox, the senior sales director, tilted his head and said what she was thinking in plainer language, probably someone trying to sell an old truck. The comment traveled no farther than the two of them, but it settled. Archer did not announce himself. He walked past the Aston Martin near the door and paused, leaning forward slightly to study the grille work with the focused stillness of a man who was used to understanding machines from the inside out. He did not touch anything. He did not pull out a phone to take photographs. He simply looked, the way a person looks when they already know what they are searching for and are checking whether what is in front of them measures up. In the mirrored surface of the showroom glass beside the Ferrari, he caught a distorted reflection of the F-100 sitting at the curb outside. He had driven that truck from Sacramento through the Central Valley and down the coast that morning, the way he still drove it whenever he had a long trip to make alone with his thoughts. His late wife, Paige, had told him once, in the last good year before everything changed, that he should never be embarrassed by the truck. "Don't you dare trade it in because someone makes you feel small," she had said. That truck took you through every year no one believed in you yet. He held on to that thought now, standing under the cool track lighting of a room full of million-dollar machines, and he felt no particular self-consciousness about the denim jacket or the dusty boots. Claire crossed the floor toward him with the smooth efficiency of someone accustomed to redirecting foot traffic. Her expression was calibrated, professionally cool rather than openly hostile, but the calculation behind her eyes was not subtle to anyone paying attention. She arrived within speaking distance and offered the kind of smile that does not reach the eyes. "Can I help you?" she said. "Or are you looking for the used car lot down the street?" Archer turned toward her without any particular hurry. He was 35 years old, lean with dark eyes that gave nothing away quickly, and there was something in his bearing that was not the posture of someone who had come to be impressed. He looked at Claire the way he might look at a component specification that contained a small but consequential error, noting it, cataloging it, moving on. He told her he had a private buyer appointment. He explained that his phone had died somewhere in the last stretch of the drive. He had used the GPS navigation extensively through the mountain route, and he had not been able to call ahead to confirm his arrival. Claire's expression did not warm. She asked for the appointment reference. Archer said the booking had gone through his office, but that the details would be on file with their system under haze. Tyler Knox materialized at Claire's shoulder the way he had a habit of doing when he sensed a situation that required a certain kind of management. He was the senior sales director, polished in a perfectly fitted Italian suit, with a watch on his wrist that cost more than most people's used cars, which was, in fact, the rough diagnostic he used to sort the room. He looked at the Ford F-100 key in Archer's hand, and he looked at Archer's jacket, and then he said it with the casual authority of someone who has never once been told he was wrong to say it. "Our clients generally don't arrive in 50-year-old pickup trucks." There was a beat of silence. One of the VIP guests near the Lamborghini, a man in a pale linen blazer, turned his head slightly at the exchange. A woman near the champagne service glanced over and looked away. Claire delivered the line that would define the entire afternoon. Her voice was light, almost amused, as if she were commenting on something faintly absurd rather than saying something genuinely cutting. "This isn't a used car lot." Archer did not raise his voice. He did not flush or clench his jaw. He held her gaze for a moment and then asked, with perfect evenness, whether the policy of the showroom was to sell automobiles only to people who already looked as though they had purchased them. Claire went still. It was not the kind of response she was prepared for, and it arrived with a quiet precision that was more unsettling than anger would have been. She was about to signal the floor security when a voice came from the other side of the Aston Martin, measured, unhurried, professionally warm, in a way that stood out from everything else in the room. "Can I get you some water? Or anything else while you look around?" Brooke Ellis had been with Von Meridian for less than 3 months. She was 26, earnest in a way that the showroom floor had not yet fully eroded, and she had crossed the space toward Archer because she had watched the exchange from 20 feet away and decided, simply, that it was wrong. She asked him which models he was interested in. She did not look at his jacket. She did not look at the keys. She looked at him the way a person looks at another person. Tyler cut between them within seconds, catching Brooke by the arm and pulling her 2 steps back with the efficient displeasure of a manager who could not believe what he was watching. "You're wasting time," he said, low and clipped. Brooke held her ground. She said quietly but without apology that every person who walked through the door deserved to be asked what they needed. Tyler looked at her the way people look at something naive and told her that this was not a philosophy seminar. Archer watched the exchange without expression. But he was paying attention, and he understood something that took some people years of hard living to learn. Integrity was not the thing people performed for an audience. It was the thing they held on to when the easier option was right in front of them. Brooke had just demonstrated it under professional pressure, with her job almost certainly in question, and she had not flinched. He looked at her, and for the first time since he had walked into the showroom, something in his expression shifted, not to warmth exactly, but to a kind of recognition. He said, addressing Brooke directly and not Tyler or Claire, that he would like to begin with the Bugatti, then the Ferrari, then the Lamborghini, the Aston Martin, and the Rolls-Royce. Tyler Knox laughed. Not a polite laugh, not a controlled professional response. A genuine, audible laugh, the kind that assumed everyone present shared the joke. No one near them laughed with him. There were things about Archer Hayes that the people in that showroom did not know, and that he had never found reason to broadcast. He had grown up in Modesto in a house where the television was always on, and the bank account was usually low, and he had developed an early instinct for systems, the way things moved, the way inefficiencies accumulated in the gaps between one step and the next, the way a small correction upstream could save enormous cost downstream. He had studied computer engineering on scholarship, worked his way into logistics software at a mid-sized firm, and had been reasonably satisfied with that life when he met Paige. She had been a high school automotive technology instructor, the kind of teacher students remembered for the rest of their lives, and she had a way of seeing potential in machinery and in people that Archer had never encountered before. They married young and built something small and good, and then Nolan was born, and for a few years the future felt clear and bright. When Paige was diagnosed, the ground shifted. When she was gone, it broke entirely. Archer was 31 years old, alone in a house with a 4-year-old son, and the only thing he knew how to do with grief was work. He had already been developing a routing optimization platform in his spare time, a system designed to improve the logistics of time-sensitive medical and industrial freight, and in the 18 months after Paige died, he worked on it with the focus of a man who needed something to hold the days together. He wrote code at night after Nolan was asleep. He tested and failed and revised and tested again. He ran the early version from a converted bay in a rented garage in Sacramento, managing both the company and his son's school pickup on a schedule that left him running on 4 hours of sleep for longer than he cared to remember. The platform, which he called Hayes Root Systems, began returning results that no existing software in the space could match. It optimized delivery windows for emergency medical supplies with an accuracy that hospitals and pharmaceutical distribution networks found transformative. It handled time-critical industrial freight in a way that reduced waste, reduced error, and reduced cost simultaneously. Within 3 years of formal launch, 3 of the largest logistics operators in the country had licensed the core system. Within 4, the platform had been acquired outright by a consortium that included 2 global shipping firms and a private equity group, in a transaction that valued Hayes Root Systems at a figure that even the financial press had found startling. Archer had taken the acquisition terms that included a substantial equity stake in the successor company, and then, with characteristic quietness, had gone home to the same house, parked the same truck in the same driveway, and enrolled Nolan in the same school district. He did not buy a new house. He did not move to a different neighborhood. He ate at the diner 2 miles from his front door, where the coffee was still poured into ceramic mugs and the pie came in thick slices. The reason he had driven to Vaughan Meridian that morning was not personal indulgence. He was building a resource center in Paige's name, the Paige Hayes Automotive Trades Foundation, a training facility for young mechanics and trade students who had ability and ambition but no access to the kind of equipment that would let them understand where the industry was heading. Each of the 5 vehicles he intended to purchase would serve as a dedicated teaching specimen. The Bugatti for combustion engineering and power-to-weight extremes, the Ferrari for hybrid performance architecture, the Lamborghini for aerodynamic design and structural composites, the Aston Martin for precision British coachwork and grand touring refinement, the Rolls-Royce Spectre for luxury electric vehicle systems and high-voltage battery integration. He was not buying them to own them. He was buying them to give students something worth studying. That morning, before leaving his hotel, he had told Nolan over the phone his son was back in Sacramento with his grandmother. that he would be home by evening. Nolan had asked if he was buying a new car because he had heard something about the trip. Archer had told him about the 5, and Nolan, who was 11 now, had asked why his father still drove the old truck when he could obviously have anything. Archer had said the same thing he always said when that question came up, the thing that he believed down in the foundation of himself. Because you shouldn't forget what carried you when you had nothing else. Back on the showroom floor, still moving from display to display with his small leather notebook open, Archer paused to make a note about the Aston Martin's wheelbase. Tyler Knox watched him from across the room, leaned toward Claire, and said under his breath, with the certainty of a man who had never once considered that he might be wrong, "He's just pretending to shop." Von Meridian Exotics had been, for the better part of a decade, one of the most respected exotic car dealerships on the West Coast. The reputation was built on access to rare inventory, on efficient documentation of imported vehicles, and on the kind of discreet, knowledgeable service that serious collectors valued. But underneath that reputation, in the day-to-day culture of the floor, something had been corroding for some time. Archer moved through the showroom with the slow patience of someone who was not performing anything. Not performing wealth, not performing knowledge, not performing anything at all. And in doing so, he became a kind of involuntary diagnostic. He watched a sales associate intercept a couple who had come in through the side entrance dressed in casual clothes, speaking to them with barely concealed reluctance before finding a reason to redirect them toward a rack of branded merchandise near the door rather than toward the cars. He watched another associate spend 40 minutes with a man who wore a conspicuous watch, never once offering the same depth of attention to the couple standing nearby, who had been trying to ask a question about the Lamborghini for 15 minutes. He watched the technical display cards next to the Ferrari and noticed that the stated torque figure was listed in error. Not by a small margin, but by a meaningful one that would have been caught immediately by anyone who actually knew the car. And he watched Brooke Ellis, who was moving carefully alongside him with a printed spec sheet she had retrieved from the filing cabinet rather than the display folder, because she had checked the display folder's numbers against the official documentation and found a discrepancy she did not feel comfortable repeating. Archer asked her about the SF90's battery integration in hybrid mode. Brooke told him what she knew with confidence, and then told him precisely, and without embarrassment, the point at which her knowledge ran out, and she would need to verify. She said she would have the correct figures from the technical file within 5 minutes if he wanted to wait. Archer said that would be good. Tyler Knox arrived before the 5 minutes were up. He had been watching from the mezzanine level above the floor, and he had come down with the expression of a man who was personally offended by the sight of his newest sales associate working a buyer he did not believe was real. He waited until Brooke had begun reading the confirmed hybrid torque specification aloud, and then he interrupted her. He said, in a tone that was controlled but audible, that staff at this showroom were not in the practice of admitting uncertainty to clients. He said it was a matter of image. He said it specifically and without apparent awareness that Archer was standing 2 feet away. Archer looked at Tyler Knox for a moment. He said, without heat, that a salesperson for a 7-figure automobile who was not willing to say, "Let me check that," was considerably more dangerous than one who admitted the limit of their knowledge. He said it was the difference between a client trusting a purchase and a client discovering afterward that they had been sold confidence instead of information. Tyler Knox's jaw tightened. Claire Vaughn, who had drifted back to within listening distance during the exchange, felt the room shift. She had been reassessing since the moment Archer had deflected her used car comment without raising his voice, and she had been growing more uncertain by the minute. But she was also the CEO of this showroom, and she had an event to manage, And something about this man, the questions, the notebook, the calm refusal to perform for the room in either direction, was making her feel wrong-footed in her own building. She made a decision that was part professional instinct and part wounded pride. She told Archer that the private viewing event was for invited clients and that she would need to ask him to step back from the floor until his appointment could be confirmed by management. Archer reminded her that he had told her he had an appointment. He gave her the name again, Hayes, Archer Hayes, private acquisition, booked through the corporate office. Tyler said the name was not on the confirmed VIP list for that day's event. He said it with the casual authority of someone who was done tolerating the situation. What Tyler had not told Claire, and what he had not told anyone because he had not fully processed his own inbox that morning, was that the appointment confirmation email had been sitting unread in his flagged folder since 3 days prior, alongside a detailed acquisition specification sheet and a note from Warren Tate's office asking that the private buyer room be reserved and that a selection of documentation be prepared. Brooke stood between the two sides of the exchange, not quite sure whether to move or speak, knowing that her position in the showroom was almost certainly being decided in real time. She did not say anything that was not true. She did not take Tyler's side to protect herself. She held her ground and waited with the particular quiet courage of someone who had decided that her integrity was not available for sale at any price, including the price of job security. Archer noticed. He had spent enough time in rooms where people said what was convenient instead of what was real to recognize the difference immediately. A security attendant had drifted to within a few feet of Archer during the last exchange, close enough to make the implication clear. Claire said, in the measured tone of a woman giving a final direction, that she would need the floor cleared of non-confirmed guests. She looked at the attendant and nodded. The front door of Von Meridian Exotics opened before the security attendant had taken 2 steps. The sound of it, the soft, precise mechanical engagement of the automatic panel, carried across the showroom in the brief silence that had fallen over the floor. And everyone turned, the way people turn when something in a room changes register without warning. Warren Tate walked in. He was 63 years old, the chairman of the Von Meridian Parent Holding Group, and he had the unhurried, squared-off presence of a man who had spent 4 decades making decisions that other people spent careers preparing for. Beside him was Naomi Pierce, his executive assistant, who carried a slim leather portfolio and moved with the organized efficiency of someone who had already anticipated every requirement of the next hour. Warren Tate scanned the floor in the practiced way of a man who had been reading rooms since before most of his employees were born. He saw the cars. He saw the staff. He saw the security attendant positioned close to a man in a denim jacket who was standing with his arms at his sides and his weight evenly distributed, and he saw Archer Hayes. Warren Tate's expression did not transform into surprise. He was too experienced for that, but it changed in a way that was readable to everyone in the room. Something tightened behind his eyes and then released, replaced by a focused attention that had nothing polite or casual about it. He crossed the floor directly, bypassing Claire and Tyler entirely, moving toward Archer with the quick, deliberate stride of someone correcting a mistake before it became worse. He extended his hand and said, with a warmth that was fully genuine rather than performed, that he was sorry. He said he had not known Archer had arrived early and that he hoped the drive down had been manageable. He said it was good to see him. The showroom absorbed the exchange in complete silence. Claire Vaughn stood 6 feet away. The champagne service had gone still. The VIP guest in the pale linen blazer had turned fully to watch. The man with the conspicuous watch had stopped moving. Brooke Ellis stood near the Ferrari with her spec sheet still in her hand, and she felt something shift in the room's atmosphere that was beyond the reach of ordinary professional dynamics. Claire said, with a careful neutrality that was doing a great deal of work, that she was not aware Warren knew this particular visitor. Warren Tate looked at her. He said that Archer Hayes was the founder of Hayes Root Systems, and that Mr. Hayes held a confirmed private acquisition appointment for that day, arranged through his own office, and that the details had been communicated to the sales director 3 days prior. He said all of this without raising his voice, but with a precision that left no part of the situation unaddressed. Tyler Knox had gone the color of unprimed drywall. Naomi Pierce opened her portfolio and removed a printed email thread, dated, time-stamped, addressed to Tyler Knox's account, containing the appointment confirmation, the acquisition specification list, and the room booking request. She placed it on the display counter with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been carrying it for exactly this moment. Claire looked at it. She looked at Tyler. She looked at Archer, and for the first time in the entire afternoon, she did not know what to do with her face. Archer had watched all of this without particular expression. When Warren turned back to him and asked if he wanted to continue with the acquisition, Archer said yes. Then he turned toward the far side of the floor, found Brooke Ellis, who was still standing near the Ferrari looking as though she was not entirely sure the ground was solid, and he said, clearly, without lowering his voice, that he would like Brooke to handle the consultation. Claire began to say something about standard process. Archer said, with the simple finality of a man who had made his decision and was not interested in revising it, "She's who I want." Warren Tate looked briefly at Claire with an expression that was not accusatory but was entirely clear. Archer did not look at Tyler Knox at all. He turned back toward the Bugatti and waited for Brooke Ellis to walk over, which she did, carrying her spec sheet and her quiet dignity and the particular composure of someone who had just survived something they hadn't expected to survive. Brooke Ellis had spent the previous 3 months at Vaughn Meridian learning the cars from the ground up, not because anyone had asked her to, but because she believed the only way to serve a client honestly was to understand what she was talking about. She had manufacturer specification books on her nightstand. She had watched recorded walkthroughs of the Bugatti's W16 engine assembly. She had requested the Rolls-Royce Spectre's electric drivetrain documentation directly from the brand's technical liaison and read it cover to cover on a Sunday afternoon. None of this had impressed Tyler Knox, who considered preparation a kind of weakness, a sign that someone was uncertain rather than authoritative. But it had made Brooke genuinely useful, in the way that real preparation always eventually becomes real usefulness when the right moment arrives. She led Archer through the 5 vehicles with a method that was thorough without being performative. At the Bugatti Chiron, she covered the W16 quad turbocharged configuration, the power output, the engineering choices made at the limit of combustion technology, and the structural decisions that allowed the car to manage forces most road vehicles were never designed to encounter. She noted the specific delivery timeline for this unit and the warranty and maintenance protocol associated with ownership at this level. At the Ferrari SF90 Stradale, she walked through the hybrid architecture, the internal combustion engine working in concert with 3 electric motors, the distribution of torque across the axles, and the charging integration. She was honest when Archer asked a question about the battery thermal management that went beyond her immediate knowledge, and she pulled up the technical file on her tablet and found the answer within 90 seconds. Archer asked questions that demonstrated he was not learning from her so much as confirming what he already knew and looking for the precision of the documentation. He asked about aerodynamic downforce coefficients on the Lamborghini Revuelto, numbers that required the Italian manufacturer's engineering brief rather than the sales sheet, and Brooke had them. He asked about the Aston Martin DB12's aluminum and composite bonded body structure, and she described it accurately. He asked about the Rolls-Royce Spectre's 800-volt electrical architecture and its recuperation system, and she laid it out cleanly, acknowledging the one figure she needed to verify before committing to it. She was not pretending to know everything. She was demonstrating that she knew how to find the truth and was not afraid to wait for it when the alternative was giving him a wrong answer. Archer respected this the way he respected good engineering, not with effusive praise, but with the quiet acknowledgement of working with something that did its job correctly. Tyler Knox made one attempt to reclaim the situation. He crossed the floor midway through the Lamborghini portion of the walkthrough, with the composed energy of a senior sales director resuming his natural role, and he began to speak directly to Archer about the year's allocation status for the Revuelto. Archer let him finish one sentence and then said, without hostility but without any softness either, that he had asked Brooke to handle the consultation, and that he would prefer to keep it that way. Tyler looked at Warren Tate, who was standing near the signing room doorway. Warren Tate offered him no rescue. Tyler withdrew. The numbers when they came together were not complicated. Archer had reviewed the pricing structures in advance and had authorization to proceed from his financial office. The 5 vehicles, the Bugatti, the Ferrari, the Lamborghini, the Aston Martin, the Rolls-Royce, represented a combined acquisition figure that was, by any standard, a singular transaction. Warren Tate confirmed later that it was the largest single client purchase in the showroom's history. The payment came through as a corporate wire from the Hayes Foundation operating account, confirmed and cleared through the banking authorization within the time it took Naomi Pierce to prepare the contract documentation. When the transaction confirmation appeared on the system terminal, the silence in the showroom was total. The VIP event guests, who had been watching the afternoon's drama unfold with increasing attention, went completely still. The champagne service had long since been set down. Claire Vaughn stood against the far wall with an expression that had moved well past discomfort into something closer to a genuine reckoning. Archer looked at the system confirmation, then at Brooke. He said it clearly enough that the room could hear it without straining. Wrap all 5. Commission goes to Brooke Ellis. Tyler Knox took one step forward. He began to say something about seniority protocols and standard commission allocation for clients of this tier. Archer turned toward Claire Vaughn. He looked at her with the same calm he had maintained from the moment he walked in off the street. He said that if this showroom operated on the principle that only staff dressed correctly were entitled to be treated with respect, then, at minimum, the person who had done the work correctly ought to be paid for it. The room held that statement for a long moment. Brooke Ellis looked down at her spec sheet and pressed her lips together. She did not cry. She was too professional for that, and too surprised. But the corners of her eyes were bright, and the hand holding the documentation was not entirely steady. Claire said nothing. There was, in fact, nothing useful to say. After the contract was signed and the documentation complete, Claire Vaughn asked to speak with Archer privately. She walked him to the small conference room adjacent to the signing suite and closed the door, and for a moment they stood on opposite sides of a narrow table that felt considerably wider than its actual dimensions. She began with the version of the apology that came naturally to her. The professional register, the careful language, the formulation designed to acknowledge error without fully inhabiting it. She said that the experience he had encountered did not reflect the standard they held themselves to, and that she hoped the outcome of the afternoon had, at least partially, repaired whatever damage had been done to his impression of the showroom. Archer listened to the whole thing. Then he said, without particular emphasis, that his experience had in fact reflected exactly the standard she held herself to. That was precisely what experience was. She went quiet. He did not say it to wound her. He said it because it was the accurate thing, and, He was the kind of person who did not see the point in softening an accurate thing into something less useful. He told her he was not angry about the way she had treated him. He told her that he understood what she had seen, a man in old clothes driving an old truck, and that he understood the calculus that had followed from that observation. What he was not willing to accept was the argument that his situation was unusual, or that what had happened to him was meaningfully different from what happened to any person who walked into that showroom without the right visual signals. If the treatment was acceptable when the recipient was genuinely without means, then it was a policy, not an accident. And a policy like that, at a business whose stated brand value was exclusivity and taste, was not a small thing. Warren Tate, who had joined them by this point, listened without intervening. Naomi Pierce had spent the previous 20 minutes reviewing the situation with quiet thoroughness, and she had assembled, without being asked, a coherent picture of the floor culture under Tyler Knox's management. There were notes in the staff incident logs about clients being redirected on the basis of appearance. There were complaints from 2 former sales associates about pressure to apply informal screening criteria that had never been formalized, because formalizing them would have made them indefensible in writing. There was a record of Brooke Ellis having filed an internal query 3 weeks earlier about whether the screening guidance she had been given verbally was consistent with the company's stated customer service principles. The query had been filed with Tyler Knox. He had not responded to it. Tyler Knox was placed on administrative suspension before the end of the afternoon. Warren Tate made clear that the investigation would be thorough and that the outcome would be proportionate. Claire accepted the weight of her own accountability without argument. She had allowed the culture to develop, had not questioned the assumptions it rested on, and had personally participated in its application that afternoon in front of witnesses. She did not try to distribute the blame more widely than it deserved. Archer told her that the reason he had completed the purchase was not because the situation had resolved itself satisfactorily. He had not stayed out of grace, and he had not stayed because Warren Tate arrived in time to smooth things over. He had stayed because of Brooke Ellis. Because someone in the building had treated him as a person before knowing anything else about him, and he was not willing to let that person's integrity go unrewarded because of someone else's failure. Claire asked him, and it took something to ask it, why he had not simply walked out, gone to a competitor, and let the story of the afternoon be its own consequence. He looked at her steadily and said that punishing the person who was kind was not the same as punishing the person who was not. Claire Vaughn was 42 years old and had run a successful business for a decade and believed herself to be a person of discernment. The afternoon had shown her something about her own discernment that she did not enjoy looking at directly, but she looked at it. Before they left the conference room, she told Archer that she would like Brooke to oversee the full delivery coordination for all 5 vehicles, and she asked whether, if it was not an imposition, he might be willing to offer some input into the customer experience standards the showroom would be developing in the months ahead. Archer said that he would consider it. He said it the way he said most things, without decoration, without performance, and it was somehow the most gracious possible answer. The deliveries were completed over the following 3 weeks, processed with the meticulous documentation that a transaction of this scale required, and each vehicle was transported to the facility that had been quietly under construction on the east edge of Sacramento, a clean industrial building with high ceilings, 12-foot service bays, and a reception corridor that carried a simple brushed steel plate beside the entrance. Page Hayes Automotive Trades Foundation. The space had been designed with training in mind. There were workstations at each vehicle bay with manufacturer technical manuals, diagnostic equipment, and annotated engineering drawings. There were observation areas where students could watch procedures being performed and perform them under supervision. There were seminar spaces where guest instructors from the industry, engineers, designers, master technicians, would come to spend time with the cohort of young people who had been selected for the program's first year. Trade school graduates, apprentice mechanics, students from vocational programs in 3 counties who had the aptitude and the drive, but had never had access to equipment at this level. Brooke Ellis had been promoted to Client Experience Lead at Vaughn Meridian Exotics within 2 weeks of the acquisition. The title was new. Claire had created it specifically, but the responsibilities it carried were real. Brooke was tasked with rewriting the intake and consultation protocol for the showroom floor, which she did with characteristic care, grounding every element of the new process in a simple principle. Every person who came through the door would be treated as though they might be the most important client who had ever walked in, because the person who appeared least likely to be exactly that had just proven, in the most visible possible way, that appearances were not a reliable guide. The showroom's culture shifted measurably in the months that followed. 2 senior sales associates left, finding the new expectations incompatible with the habits they had built. 3 new hires came aboard who fit what the showroom was working to become. Clients who had previously felt subtly unwelcome, and there had been more of them than Claire wanted to count, began returning. The business did not suffer. It grew. On the morning of the Foundation's opening event, a small gathering of supporters, staff, and the first cohort of students assembled in the main bay of the Page Hayes facility. The 5 vehicles, Bugatti, Ferrari, Lamborghini, Aston Martin, Rolls-Royce, were parked in a row under the bay lights, and in the morning sun coming through the bay doors they were extraordinary things. Each one a different argument for what human engineering could achieve when money and time and talent were aligned toward an extreme. Outside, in the parking area, Archer Hayes's 1968 Ford F-100 sat at the curb the way it always sat, a little weathered, a little dusty from the drive, completely itself. Nolan stood beside his father, looking from the pickup to the 5 vehicles and back again, in the way that 11-year-old boys look at things that do not immediately compute. He asked his father why, given everything, he still drove the old truck. Archer put a hand briefly on his son's shoulder and said what he had been saying his whole adult life, in one form or another, because it was the truest thing he knew. "The supercars teach you to dream big," he said. "The truck reminds me not to forget the road that got me here." Claire Vaughn arrived during the opening remarks. She had driven herself in a car that was not one of the showroom's demonstrators, and she stood at the edge of the gathering for most of the first half hour, watching the students move around the vehicles with the stunned, careful reverence of people who had read about these machines in books and were not quite convinced yet that they were allowed to be this close. She found Archer near the end of the event, when most of the formal proceedings had wound down and the cohort had dispersed into the bays to begin the first orientation session. She told him that she had spent the months since their first meeting thinking about the things he had said, and that she had come to understand something she had not understood before. The premium of the brand she was selling had nothing to do with who was allowed to buy it. It had to do with what the buying experience meant. If the experience was only good for people who already appeared to belong, it was not premium. It was exclusion dressed as taste. Archer looked out through the open bay door at the Ford F-100 in the morning light. He said that a good showroom didn't sell cars to rich people. It sold the possibility of something extraordinary to everyone who was willing to take it seriously, and it trusted that the people who were serious would make themselves known in time. Claire said she had nearly shown the largest single buyer she had ever encountered to the door because she had looked at his truck and decided the story was already finished. Archer smiled just slightly. He said she had not shown him to the door. She had shown him something more useful than that. She had shown him exactly what the room needed to learn, and he had gotten a very clear picture of it before anyone realized they were being observed. Claire nodded once, slowly. Outside, the F-100 sat patient and unchanged in the California morning. Inside, under the lights, 5 of the most extraordinary machines ever built waited to teach the next generation of people who would keep them running. And the single father who had been told, in the most dismissive possible tone, that he had walked into the wrong kind of establishment, had turned out to be the one who showed it what it was supposed to be.